Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another Riftbound deck guide video. This is the third entry in the series, and today we're going over Master Yi. Master Yi is a very strong but relatively straightforward deck that's been performing very strongly at both the Chinese regionals as well as the online tournaments that I've been participating in. Hope you guys enjoy it. We're going to hop right into it and see what this is all about. So, what we're going to go over in this video is we're going to do a high-level overview of the champion, legend, and deck in general. We are going to go over the general strategy for playing this deck. I'll show you guys my deck list, and then as well as the sideboard and some alternatives that other decks that are similar to this are running, some of the cuts. Then we'll go over some of the matchup guides, which decks this performs well against, which ones it doesn't, as well as the Mulligan and the win conditions, as well as just talk about some of my experience playing this deck in the online tournaments. So, you guys, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. You can screenshot it if you want. These are the graphs provided by Piltover Archive in the deck builder. Essentially, what this is saying is it's showing us that this is a Calm and Body rune deck, and that the Calm cards make up a lot of our lower cost units and spells, while the Body type cards are going to be a lot of our mid and late game finisher units. So, Master Yi Legend ability. The ability is, while a friendly unit defends alone, it gets +2 might. This is very straightforward as long as you understand what defending means. So, what is defending defined as? Defending is defined as whenever a unit is holding a battlefield and an enemy unit enters that battlefield, the unit that is at that battlefield enters what's called a defending state, since it is being attacked by another unit. Once that state is initiated, Master Yi then gives the defending unit +2 might. So this is not to be confused with as soon as the unit is in the battlefield, it is in a defensive state. So if you have a 2 might unit sitting in a battlefield and your opponent does not enter that battlefield with a unit, it does not get that +2 might buff. This is important because if you have a 2 might unit, for example, and the opponent can just play for example, Chemtech Ray, which does 3 damage to a unit at the battlefield, this will kill your unit as long as they've not entered the battlefield with another unit. But if they enter the battlefield and then play the Chemtech Ray, then in that case, you would survive the Chemtech Ray because they had entered the battlefield and triggered your defense ability. So, all that to mean, this deck encourages solo holding battlefield and trying to get points through holding battlefields by giving your units a buff when it comes to showdowns and getting hold points. And this will build on top. This will build on top of the deck with buff cards, the battlefields we've chosen, and just the general unit abilities that we're playing. So the champion unit, we are playing one copy of this champion unit. Very straightforward unit. It is a 7 cost, 1 power, 1 body room power for 6 might where he enters ready. It's basically like you're getting the accelerate cost with having to pay for it. This card is going to be our closer. This is how we are going to get points 6, 7, and 8. You're probably going to be too low on runes to be able to use it to really get those early game points anyway, but we really do not want to use this card since we're only running one copy and it's in our champion slot without either a plan to keep it alive for when the opponent swings back to try to take this for us, or we just want to use this to secure points 7 and 8 with like a big final push to grab the last 2 points. One thing I've touched on in my other videos, even though Riftbound is a game to 8 points, it really is a race to 6 points to set up your plan to take that final 2 points with a swing that usually, even when your opponent knows is coming, they cannot stop it. As I've touched on, let's go over the general strategy for this deck. What we want to do with this deck is establish a board presence early on at least one, ideally 2 battlefields with our low cost 2 and 3 cost units, which are 2 and 3 mites by themselves, but often have abilities such as Defender or giving buffs to other units, and get them onto the battlefield so that we can use the Master Yi Legend ability to gain 2 might. While this still does leave us open to hard removal, especially from the Fury body type, this really shuts down any chance opponents have of just getting fair trades with us with their other cheap units, because inevitably it will essentially make our 2-cost 2-might units become 4-might units and such, which are really hard to deal with early on without having to use a removal answer. And then the idea is once they use their buffs or their removal to get rid of these low-cost units, we'll have ramped into our medium to late game finishers, which will then take care of their units, and then hopefully they will have exhausted resources or will be forced to overextend resources to take care of these units. And by that time, we'll be have our late game finishers set up to take momentum. So, just general, make our opponent overtrade and overspend on stuff that they shouldn't. Use our very strong legend ability to turn small units into medium units and medium units into large units, and then close out the game with our very strong units and spells that put our might at really, really high levels. No other deck in the game is as good as holding points as this deck is. This is very different from a lot of decks which are trying to split units and split resources to try to gain points through conquering battlefields one at a time. We're really trying to set up units on the battlefields to hold, and then units in our base to replace them and to be able to conquer with our small buffs. So here's the deck list I have. Sorry, my face cam is blocking the bottom of the sideboard, but I have a slide going over the sideboard, and I'll also include the deck list in the description. Screenshot this if you want, but I will be going over every single card in this deck, what its purpose is, how many there are, etc. So let's start with battlefield. So as I've talked about, we really want to establish presence on the battlefield and initiate holds. So what battlefields are we picking? Battlefields that give us both bonuses for establishing holds or bonuses for helping our cards establish holds. Grove of the Godwillow. This is often my turn 1 or my game 1 battlefield that I choose when I go in blind. Reason being is, especially if we're first, we're going to be able to get a hold in, get extra card draw. This deck does not have a lot of card draw minus our Clockwork Keeper and Discipline, so getting an extra card draw through our battlefield is great. Dreaming Tree. We have a lot of cheap buff spells in this deck, and Dreaming Tree allows us to draw a card every time we buff a friendly unit with a spell. The first time each turn. So if we hold this battlefield, we can potentially be getting 1, 2, sometimes even 3 extra cards depending on how much we're able to hold this. So very strong battlefield. Star-Tipped Peak is definitely the worst of the 3 battlefields, I would say. But again, there's no reason we wouldn't play it. We hold here, we channel 1 Rune Exhausted. Some of our late game options do require some substantial recycle costs, so this is really good for getting us over the edge or not hurting our rune pool too much. All right, let's move on to the early and mid game units. So Clockwork Keeper, as I mentioned, 2 might, 2 cost. You can choose to recycle a mind rune to draw a card. This is really nice, especially in the late game, for making this not like a useless draw in the late game. And even in the early game, I'll often sacrifice a rune to draw a card if I'm not a big fan of my hand. Pit Rookie is really, really strong for buffing our Deflect unit, Kiana, to make her a 5 might and then 7 might if it enters the battlefield. But when you play me, buff another friendly unit. Having said that, if this is the only unit in your hand that's a 2 cost, you should still play this on turn 1 just to have that 2 cost 2 might, but if you do get to actually use its effect, it's just a nice little bonus. And then lastly, Stalwart Poro, 2 cost 2 might plus 1 might when it is a defender due to that shield ability. So that can be really strong in the early game, essentially being a 5 might unit unless they use removal early on. Our other early and mid-game units, we have First Mate, 3 cost 3 might. When you play me, ready another unit. This is really good in combo with like doing our turn 2, turn 3 play. We play a Poro, and then we play First Mate right after. Ready the Poro. Poro can go enter, take the battlefield, get us a point. Very strong with that. It's also good for if we have some of our stronger units, but we know our opponents are going to have an answer to them, we can ready that unit to go take the battlefield, conquer, and then pull them right back out if we're certain we're not able to defend it. Wielder of Water, we only run 1 in the main deck and 2 in the sideboard, and essentially you're going to be sideboarding this guy when you know you're going second. So you win the first game, you're going first, opponent gets to choose going second. You would then probably replace 2 of your Poros with this guy so that you can play on curve more effectively. And also, he's just very strong. If he's attacking alone, he immediately becomes a 3-cost 4 might card. That's already good value. And if he's defending alone, he becomes a 3-cost 6 might, which is insane value. And it's really hard for your opponent to answer without direct removal. Lastly, Kiana. Everyone knows that Kaisa is the best deck in the game right now. Kiana is the key to allowing us to finish these games against Kaisa and shut her out and give us a chance to win these games. We're running 3 of these in our main deck. She has a deflect cost, which means that anytime you try to target her with a spell, you have to pay 1 more deflect cost. This is outrageously good against cards like Falling Star with Kaisa, where they already have to recycle 2, and then they have to recycle 2 more for each time they target her. Very good card against any control deck. And then she also has a great conquer effect where you can either boost your runes or your card draw with her conquering a battlefield. So amazing card in this deck, and even better when we combine it with some of our cards like our cheat buff spells or our Zonias to keep her alive. So very key in getting her established in the early to mid game and then protecting her so that we can maximize value out of her. So, mistake on the title, but these would be our late game finisher cards right here. Carnivorous Snapvine is a 5-cost 2 body recycle card with 6 might that has the ability of when you play me, choose an enemy unit at a battlefield. We deal damage equal to our mights to each other. This is very strong in just clearing out a battlefield and then allowing us to get a free conquer, and then we can establish again our once we have the card on the battlefield, we're really good at holding it. It's conquering is what's hard for this deck. So this is a big enabler for that. This card does struggle against Kaisa or any card that plays the Mind Runes because Smokescreen is such a strong card, and it essentially nullifies this card and makes it useless. So this is a card we'll sideboard out in those Kaisa matchups or in those control matchups that are using the body type rune where they have Smokescreen. But in all other matchups, very, very good. This trades really well into a lot of decks, champion units, or strong mid-game cards. Dead Bloom Predator. This is where my deck differs from a lot of the decks at the Chinese regionals that have been performing well. White Flame Protector is typically the card that they are playing, which we will go over later, but it's a 8-cost 2 Mind Rune that Calm Rune that we recycle, green. And it gives a unit +8 might this turn. I like this card better because of the dominance of Kaisa in the meta. It allows us to have a chance to retake the battlefield after they combo with Darius and take the battlefield and get rid of that immediate threat. You can play it immediately to an occupied battlefield, whereas the White Flame Protector, you would have to rely on a unit in your base, which when in the Kaisa matchup, we're getting Falling Starred a lot. So due to Kaisa's presence in the meta right now, I'm running Dead Bloom Predator. Wouldn't blame you if you like the White Bloom or the White Flame Protector version better. All up to personal preference. And then lastly, we're running 1 copy of the Master Yi Champion and just leaving it in our champion slot. As I said, a big decision with this deck is knowing when to come in and swing with this guy and when to use him to get that 6th, 7th, and 8th point. So, the buff spells that I've been talking about are cheap buff spells. Discipline and Unguard are the bread and butter of this deck. Discipline, give a unit +2 might this turn and draw 1 with reaction speed. 2 cost, no recycle, incredibly good value, really good for both keeping our early game units alive to get us strong holds and to deny the enemy, give them surprise losses in a showdown when they think they might have a win. It's good for living through some of those removal spells that the opponent has, so it gets them nervous about using stuff like a Void Missile or a Chemtech Ray. And then Unguard, since we're basically always wanting to attack or hold the battlefield alone, Unguard is basically give us 2 might for 1 cost and help us live, or it allows us to, in the early game, if the opponent goes first, takes the battlefield with a 2 might unit, we're able to make our 2 might unit a 4 might, overtake that battlefield, and then it works very well with our battlefield, the Grove Tree or whatever it's called. Primal Strength, great mid-range, a bit mid-cost spell with a 1 body recycle cost. Give a unit +7 this turn. This is useful for both protecting our units that are holding battlefields. If you give a unit +7 might and they're trying to remove it with spells, pretty much GG on that unless they commit like a Singularity, another Falling Star, cards like that. And then it's also great for retaking battlefields. It's almost like summoning a little bit of a cheaper Master Yi with a card that you already have in base. So I run 2 of these in my deck. Sometimes I'm sideboarding it out depending on the matchup, but another very powerful card. And then our other spells in the deck. These are I would also call our bread and butter spells. Zonia's Hourglass. You can use it as a hidden or just play it for its gear cost in base. I usually just play this in base because I don't want to pay the recycle cost, and I have not seen almost any deck running the destroy gear cards in my experience. So I think right now, in the current state of the meta, you're pretty safe playing this. Later on, if a lot of decks are sideboarding in gear destroyers, then that's maybe when we'd want to do a hidden card or play it for the hidden value. But essentially, the next time a friendly unit would die, you kill the Zonia's Hourglass instead and recall that unit exhausted into your base. This is incredibly strong for holding bases, especially with our strong units like Kiana, Snapvine, Dead Bloom. We're basically turning it into like its set ability where they live. Instead of dying, they come back to our base, and then we can use these strong units to retake the battlefield. So very, very strong card. Usually don't. We usually use this to set up and essentially make it impossible for our opponent to retake or rehold the battlefield after they commit a ton of resources to conquering it. Charm, this is our bread and butter. We need the defend ability to go off with our Master Yi Legend. In order to get that ability to go off, we have to be defenders. Charm forces us to become defenders. They have a unit in base, they have a unit in another battlefield. Charm them into our battlefield. We have a unit already there. We become defenders, get that 2 might buff. This is how we establish tempo in the early game. This is how we get rid of their threats in the late game. This is a staple card. Always need to be running 3 of these in the deck. Never sideboard this card out. Very, very strong, and it's how we force a lot of these interactions, a lot of these showdowns that we want to be taking on our terms as the defender. Sideboard. Talked about Wielder of Water. Run 2 in the sideboard. Put it in. If you're going second, take out 2 Poros, put in 2 Wielders so that you can play on curve with 3. Strong card. Blitzcrank. You could argue that this should be in the main deck over Snapvine. And to be honest, I don't know how I feel. I've just been running Snapvine in the main deck because that's what everyone seems to be running. But if you're going into a tournament and you're expecting a ton of Kaisas, you probably would want to swap out the Snapvine for the Blitzcrank. The way Blitzcrank works, you play him to a battlefield, you charm an enemy unit into that battlefield, and Blitzcrank has tank, which means he gets assigned combat damage first. So oftentimes, let's say against Kaisa, for example, she's got the Kaisa champion unit in the other battlefield. You're holding with like a Poro in the other one. You play Blitzcrank to the Poro, bring Kaisa over here. Because Blitzcrank is a tank, he kills Kaisa. She cannot assign her damage to the Poro. Boom. You get the kill on Kaisa, you're going to get the point for hold, and then when you hold, you get to return Blitzcrank to your hand and have the option to play him again later. So it's like refreshing your charms. And then at worst, if you need a tempo play on turn 2 and you're going second, you can play a 5 might unit in your base and then know that when you move him to the battlefield on the next turn, you can essentially charm another creature or another unit. So very, very strong card. I really could see the argument of running 1 in your main deck, 2 in your sideboard, or all 3 in your sideboard, putting Snapvine out here. Great card. Sabotage. Why are we running Sabotage? Say it with me, Dazzling Aurora decks. This is how you win the Dazzling Aurora matchup. The opponent gets to turn 3, turn 4. They're at 8 runes. They're going to 10 next turn. You Sabotage, snipe the Dazzling Aurora out of their hand. Still useful in other matchups, like some of these control matchups where they play a ton of spells, especially decks that are running Time Warp or Singularity or some of these control-heavy decks, so like Annie, who has a lot of cards where they can send your cards back to your hand. Snipe these cards out really ruins their game plan, and it can also just throw the opponent off because they're not expecting it because you didn't play it in the first game. Unyielding Spirit, you're sideboarding this in any control matchup where they have a lot of spell removal. Prevent all spell and ability damage this turn, and it is at reaction speed. They might not be expecting, or if they're playing a super heavy, super expensive card that Defy cannot counter, and I realized I forgot to put Defy in my other spells slide, but I'll just have it pop up on screen right here. It's one cost for basically counter a spell, but it can only be up to a certain cost. If they're playing a really expensive spell like Ecothian Rain, Singularity, just Falling Comet, you can use Unyielding Spirit, and that essentially turns into another Defy. So very, very powerful card in the control matchups. So now we're going to go into cards that I think you could potentially swap into the deck, swap out. I have not run any of these in my deck specifically, but I've seen some of these run in other decks or in online tournaments, and I'm not upset at these. I think they all have a place, and you could make an argument for replacing certain cards, especially like the unit cards like Wielder of Water, Poro, etc. Sunlit Guardian, 3 cost, 3 might, and he has shield and tank. Good for protecting other cards, like if you have a Kiana in your battlefield, you can reinforce this on top of Kiana and really stop those pushes from the units like the Darius and stuff like that. Block is really good because it's your it can be another option for hidden. So, the opponent's usually going to be guessing that Zonia's is the hidden card, but if you're running block and you surprise them, then they might take a fight they think they can win by being up maybe 1 or 2 might, or expecting you to, account for an extra 1 to 2 might. The +3 might is a really good break point, and it's something they might not expect. I don't personally run it just because I think Discipline is better because you get the card draw, but I do think there's a world where you are able to fit this card in. Mask of Foresight, again, just basically turns our Master Yi ability into working on conquering, because whenever a friendly unit attacks alone or defends alone, it gets +1 might, or it just continues to buff our cards already holding in base, and essentially they get +3 might for defending alone. So that can get out of hand really fast. I couldn't find a way to work it into the deck, but again, I think you could cut some of these units, have some of this gear down. I think it could be really strong. Same with Spirit's Refuge here. When you play this, buff a friendly unit. Buffed units have deflect. If we get into a meta where it is pretty much exclusively spell removal, deflect becomes the ultimate counter to that, and we can give our units deflect with buffs, and we already have the Pit Rookie, and there's other cards that I didn't include in the potential swaps, but that we could put in that will buff other units, and you could almost sort of turn this deck into a buff type of deck, and then this would be incredibly strong in that. Warwick. What is the reason we include Warwick for? Dazzling Aurora decks. I could see this being a very good counter and putting it in your sideboard for if there's a meta where there's a lot of Dazzling Auroras. The reason why, Warwick enters ready, and when he attacks, you kill all damaged enemy units here. You can combine this with Flurry of Blades, I believe, where it does 1 damage to all units at the battlefield. You can combine this just with swinging in some small dudes like a Poro to take out 2 8/8s. We'll talk about the matchups later, but against Dazzling Aurora decks, if you don't draw your Sabotage, or they're able to get 1, 2 Dazzling Auroras off and they start contesting the battlefields, we're really good at getting to points 1 through 5, 6 on that, but sometimes getting those last 2 points when they start reinforcing the battlefield becomes near impossible. And I do think this card would be a good counter to that. Mage Seeker Warden, this is basically to stop Dead Bloom Predator. We're not the only deck that runs Dead Bloom Predator, so what Mage Seeker Warden does is that when he's at a battlefield, you can only play units to the base, and spells and abilities can't ready enemy units and gear. So this will stop the gear decks from being able to pull off their combos, and it will stop them from being able to play Dead Bloom Predator as an 8 might right into our base, which will usually wipe in most scenarios. And then lastly, we talked about White Flame Protector. I won't go too much on it. 8 cost, 8 might, 2 calm rune recycle. Give a unit +8 this turn. It's just kind of depends on what you need, right? Dead Bloom, you can play right to the enemy battlefield that's occupied, get a conquer there. But if you're find yourself more often having units in base but not able to attack into big units, this turns into an 8 body plus another +8 for this turn to allow you to conquer that, so you get more long-term value. I'm honestly considering in future versions of this deck running 2 white flame protectors in my sideboard, and then potentially using them to swap out the Dead Bloom Predators depending on the matchup. Deck matchups. I've played about 50 to 75 games with this deck. Against Jinx, Misfortune, and Ari, I found myself probably having about an 80% win rate. You match up really well against these decks. If you draw Kiana against Jinx and Misfortune, you're in a really, really strong spot just due to the deflect cost. Using Zonias, they waste a lot of stuff, have to toss their runes. Zonias, your Kiana's still there, still not dealt with. Very simple. Lux and Garen, you're pretty much always going to have an advantage playing against these two decks. They are not in very good spots in the meta right now. Probably the 2 weakest decks. So most decks would have an advantage playing against those. Unfavorable matchups. Kaisa is the best deck in the game, and even with Master Yi, if you're going second, it's really hard to come back in that if they draw well. Your only chance is just getting insane Kiana value, which is possible. I have beat Kaisas with this deck, but it's probably more like a 45 to 50% win rate, whereas Kaisa's got the 50-55% win rate. And you really have to draw Kiana to beat that. Volibear, if he ramps well, ramps effectively, gets his Dazzling Auroras down, gets his ridiculously strong units down, we're just not going to have enough firepower to get ourselves back in the game. Even when we have Dead Bloom Predator, Master Yi, Champion, we're coming in with like 6-8 might units. He's sometimes going to have like 12-10 might units, and he's going to start stacking it with Dazzling Aurora. So we really have to outrace him to the 8 points there. Token Darius is kind of the opposite. He really just outpaces us. He's super fast, plays a bunch of units, splits them at the battlefield. We get no value from Snapvine, and then he'll be at 4 points sometimes before we can even blink. And so I just found myself getting outraced by that deck, and it's really hard to sideboard for. Even if you put in like a Fury of Blades in the sideboard or something like that, I just think that deck is always going to be a tough matchup for us. Annie, kind of a slightly less effective Kaisa, but she has a lot of cards with the Chaos set rune type where they will send our units back to base, they will move our units, and they'll basically stall us out, get like a huge lead early, 5-6 runes, and then close us out with the burn. And then her champion ability as well is even when she spends a bunch of runes to conquer a battlefield, she readies to at the end of her turn, and then she still has answers to our creatures swinging into base. And then lastly, some of the other decks that I just think I need more experience with. Yasuo, Teemo, Leona, Victor. Didn't play a whole lot of any of these in my matches. They're just not as popular as some of these other decks. Yasuo, they're kind of playing their own game, but I would imagine we would perform well against that deck since we want to hold on to battlefields. Teemo, really couldn't tell you. Seems like something we might struggle with since you can play him hidden and deal a bunch of damage to us if we're trying to take hold. So I think if Teemo goes first and gets set up like they want to, it would be really hard for us to come back in. But if we're able to establish presence on the battlefield, we might be able to win that matchup. Leona, I think, would be tough because a lot of her units have stun. And when they stun us, it basically makes our charm cards useless, and that takes away a big reason why we play this deck. So I would say probably not the greatest versus Leona. And Victor, I would imagine it's not amazing against just due to Token Darius being so good. But I do know Victor's kind of shifting from a state of being super aggressive to more of a mid-rangey type deck. So just need more experience playing against some of these decks. All right. So, general mulligan strategy for this deck. We always want to go first if we can. Every single deck in the game, you want to go first, except for maybe Volibear, just due to his ramp. If you're going first, you are looking for your 2-drops, Kiana, Zonia's Hourglass, and a buff spell, ideally. If you're going second, then you're looking for your 3-drops as well, and you hopefully have sideboarded in the Wielders of Water if it's game 2. Other than that, strategy stays the same. Charm is another keep, especially if you're going first. If you're going first, the best thing to do is we put Poro down. Maybe they respond to 2 cost. They put down a Ravenbloom student. You take with Poro, Charm Ravenbloom, boom. That's already a fight win. They're out of runes. You get the Conquer point. You're probably going to get the Hold point unless they have Removal spell, and then maybe you have like an Unguard or Discipline in your hand. Boom, keep it alive through that. We're getting card draw. We're already at 3 points before they can even get another unit onto the field. Very, very strong. But again, the most important thing is we do need one, ideally two units that we can play in the early game to establish the presence on board and play on curve. And then lastly, Kiana is a must keep if we're playing against control matchups, Kaisa, Annie, Lux, Jinx. And then you can mulligan her if it's against like very unit heavy decks that aren't running removal at all, like Master Yi. So Kiana not as important in the Master Yi matchup, and you could probably sideboard her out after game one. Example of a dream opening hand here would be just sort of like I said, Poro, Kiana, Zhonya's Discipline. The way this hand would probably play out if you were going first. Tap 2, play Poro, opponent goes, move Poro into base, take the conquer point, play Kiana on turn 2, she's in your base. They maybe have to use a resource to get rid of Poro, or they play a unit. Then we move Kiana in, we're playing Zhonya's the next turn to keep her alive. We have enough runes to put discipline if they try to swing in with a big unit. And now we've started establishing our holes on the battlefields and we're ramping up. So you can kind of see where this would be going. Win conditions for this deck. Strong early game units due to Master Yi's champion ability, as well as some of the card abilities. We hold battlefields after we take the initial conquer of 1 to 2 points. We use our strong legend ability to help us get holds, get us to about 5-6 points. We use our charm to get value trades by activating our legend ability, getting rid of cards that are integral to their game, especially if they have to play them into their base and not onto the battlefield. Charm them to our base, take the fight where we want to take it, and not be forced to attack into them. And then we use Kiana and other units with. We use Kiana and her deflect ability to demand overspending of resources, and then we protect her with gear like the Zhonya's Hourglass or the small buff spells. And then finally, we come in with the finishers, which are Master Yi, Dead Bloom, and even Snapvine to some extent. So, closing thoughts and just sort of my overall experience with the deck. Very strong deck. Very straightforward deck as well. So this is a good deck if you're really just starting to get into Riftbound or card games in general. There's enough things to think about. You have to think about setting up your holds with Zhonya's. You have to think about the math when charming units to you with Master Yi's abilities, thinking about your buffs, the battlefield, stuff like that. But it is a good strong deck. I would call it the second strongest deck in the game, and that is supported by the tournament results and the online results. Typically, it's going to be almost Kaisa 1, Master Yi 2, and then we kind of fall into the tiers after that. I'd probably say Kaisa is like tier 0 or S tier, and then Master Yi is like S tier or that high A tier, depending on how you think about it. Not quite as good as Kaisa, but it has a fighting chance to beat her, which a lot of decks can't even speak for. The most important decisions are knowing what to buff, when to buff them, and where to buff them, I would say. You have to do the math in your head. You have to know what to expect with their removal, how they're expecting to get around. Some decks want to get through you with removal, whether it's, the mind runes with spell damage, or it's with like gank Darius with cleave, or how they want to get, or it's faithful watcher. You have to know how they're going to plan on getting through you. You have to know those limits with how much might you can expect them to come in if it's coming with units, or how much damage they can do if it's spells. You need to be able to successfully set up the protection for your holds and to not overcommit resources. If we overcommit like our Master Yi champion just to get us to the 4th or 5th point, and then we're unable to protect him and he dies, it's going to be really hard for us to get those final 3 points. So thinking about stuff like that. Your sideboard decisions are going to be critical, not only in what cards to include in your sideboard period, but when to bring in certain cards, what cards to bring out, knowing Snapvine's not very good against Kaisa, but it is very good against the Master Yi mirror matchup. Just stuff like that's going to be very important. Don't get discouraged in the mirror matchup. The mirror matchup really is more luck than it is skill. Especially in the early game, obviously, there's a lot of skill involved, but as the game goes on, people get better. Don't get discouraged. Just because you lose the mirror matchup does not mean that they're a better player than you. Sometimes it's who goes first, who gets charm, who has the answer at this moment. So don't get discouraged by that. And then just know that my deck list runs the Dead Bloom Predator, but the more popular deck list right now is to run White Flame Protector. And then my experience with this deck in tournaments, I went 3-1 and 2-2 in Rift Lab Clash 3 and 4. I lost to a Token Darius in that 3-1 matchup, and then I believe in the 2-2 I lost to a Kaisa and a mirror matchup. And then I went 1-2 in like a weekly Thursday night fight night, but not my best performance. But again, I lost like 1 to a Kaisa and 1 to a mirror matchup again. So you're losing to these good decks, and like when you lose to a mirror matchup, you know that's not always specifically on the deck choice, right? It might be your sideboard choice, or it might just be luck, or what was drawn, etc. But I would recommend anyone to play this deck if you really are anti Kaisa. You don't want to be on the Kaisa train. This is the second strongest deck in the game. I feel very certain about that. It is a more straightforward deck, but there's still a lot to think about. So don't like write off this deck. I found this deck to be very fun, very interesting to play, very challenging. I still made plenty of mistakes playing this deck, but overall, strong deck, very effective, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how this develops as more sets drop and how it performs when people start teching decks to fight Kaisa specifically. I think there's a chance this could rise in the rankings or win a few tournaments. We've seen it lose in the championship twice now, and I think with some better piloting and some better luck, it does have a chance to start taking these tournaments. So thank you everyone for watching. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube. The next deck list coming out I'm planning on it being set, probably coming out in 2 weeks. I have 2 other videos like this for Victor and Kaisa, and I'm hoping to also be uploading more than just every 2 weeks these deck guides. I think I want to start doing just some live commentaries on games I'm playing in. Make sure to follow me on Twitch. I have that in the description. I'll always stream my point of views when I compete in these tournaments. And follow me on X, Twitter, X. I post out when I'm streaming. I post links to the deck guides. I try to interact with the community on there when I can. But again, thank you so much for watching. If you guys could like and subscribe and share this video, it does take a lot of effort to do these videos between playing the matches, making the presentations, recording the videos, trying to really learn all these decks. And I love doing it, but it does mean a lot when I see the support that goes on. So thank you so much. I will see everyone in the next video, and y'all take care.